So the structure of the movie kind of came together in the editing room, I guess?
No,
or did you have a clear idea of how you wanted it to be structured? Clearly, at a lot, you wanted to.
Well, I had an idea to a certain point, but for example, it wasn't until we got to the editing room that I knew how much, we were going to start in the present and then go back in the story, or how much back and forth there was going to be, or whether it was going to be strictly chronological. And as it turned out, it was more or less chronological the way it was told. And in the beginning, I thought, well, that's not a very imaginative way to tell the film. And I think I was looking for something that was very kind of hip or different, and that's what I thought another, a seasoned director could bring to the film. And as we went on, I just felt that it was a more honest way of portraying a story that I wanted to be very honestly told, and that I didn't want a lot of tricky things at all. I just wanted to be as straightforward as possible with the story.
Well, a lot of young editors are have very strong voices, very strong ideas. Is that one of the things? I mean, were you able to rely on your editor to say, yes, you're on the right track? This is not you don't need to clever it up, or did you just figure that on your own by doing multiple cuts?
I didn't want to clever it up a lot,
right,
actually. And the editors that I worked with were great, and I was very, very, very involved in the editing process. I mean, the first editor that I used, I had two editors, and they kind of worked, one worked for about 4 months, and then the other worked for 3 months after that. And the first editor was, I left him alone with the material for, I don't know, a couple of weeks just to digest all of what we had. And then we started working together, and he would work in the morning on what we had discussed the day before, and I would go off and work on my own in the morning, trying to find other material that might be relevant to what we were working on at the time. And then in the afternoon we would look at it together and kind of make a plan for the next day, what we were both going to do. And that happened with both editors. And the first editor was great because he had a real feeling for the human side of the story. And the second editor was, actually, I brought him in to tighten up dance sequences at the suggestion of some people at Dance on Camera, because I had sent a rough cut of the film to enter it in their Dance on Camera festival. And they called me and they said, we really love the film, but I think you need to tighten up the dance sequences. So is it strange to get that criticism? I mean, is it strange to be in the position where you're submitting to festivals and people are saying, well, we like this, but we don't like that, or are you used to that? Are there circumstances in which you get that otherwise? It seemed normal because I don't know. It didn't really bother me. I mean, it does bother me sometimes if someone has seen the film, let's say a critic or something, and they just don't get it. They just don't get the point. I mean, one person, for example, was complaining about the fact, they said something about there's incredible performance footage. Too bad you have to wait, half an hour to get to see it. Well, I mean, they just missed the whole point. The whole point is the development of a dancer. It's not the point of the film is not the best of Baryshnikov. That's not the point at all. I mean, this is somebody who's learning to dance, and this is part one of an evolving story. So
does the festival? So you've been on the festival circuit now for about a year.
Right.
I guess it started in Seattle. It was the premiere of the film.
Yes.
Last year. So is that a whole different activity for you than making of the film, or does it feel like a natural extension of the filmmaking process?
In a way, it's a natural extension because it's so. I'm not someone who's ever liked to talk in front of an audience at all. I mean, I would do anything to avoid it. I've avoided being president of organizations because I didn't want to be the one that stood up and had to address the group. And I mean, I thought a very shy person, and actually, it's been a revelation to me that that talking about my film has been a completely different experience. I've really loved it. I mean, having the Q&As at the film festivals has been really fun. I love talking about Cambodia and the work that I've done there, and about the country and the state of their arts, and I've loved having feedback from people about the film and addressing questions and all that. I think it's really fun. I've had a great time.
Have you felt like you mixed in with the other filmmakers at these festivals, or is that part of the fun of it?
Yeah, it is fun. It is fun.
Do you have any interest in doing more films, or are you kind of
You know, I honestly have been until the last almost month so involved because just recently we decided to make a 35 millimeter version of the film because it fortunately has a large theatrical release, and so from the one thing about film festivals that was not fun was I felt like every single screening was a live performance because you never knew what you were going to find. I mean, every no, it was unbelievable. The projection equipment is so different in every single venue. It was.
The film festivals kind of all feel that same way too, because they're
do.
dealing with
and I mean,
everybody's
people at
different prints.
Technicolor, when I was doing the 35 millimeter print, they said, I was telling them why I was doing this and my experiences, and they said, "Oh, believe me, we know we've had calls from filmmakers sobbing on the telephone from film festivals, you know, because that's just what happens." So, and the 35 millimeter is a pretty standard, and there is like a standard projection for that, but for digital, it's just all over the map. Yeah. And I have as I mentioned earlier, a sound mix that I'm very, very pleased with and that I work really hard on. I actually did 2 complete different sound mixes. I did a stereo mix and a 5.1. And to be someplace where your sound isn't like properly played through their system is very upsetting.
It's like watching somebody slap your baby.
Yeah.
Not so much fun.
Right.
And the state of the arts in the United States, I guess, they've been somewhat under attack by in terms of the government funding in the last number of years. Does it feel like, this is the kind of film that reminds you why we need to support the arts and what greatness can come of it in that process. Do you feel like that is under attack in this country, or is it just moving to the private side more and more? Or?
I think that the thing that's so different about the arts in our country, as opposed to, I travel a lot, and for example, in Cambodia, the government is almost against their arts institutions. They, for example, sold the School for the Performing Arts. And the performing arts there, the Royal Ballet of Cambodia is an intangible treasure of UNESCO, and the government, so in other words, next to their monuments, their historic monuments at Angkor Wat and so forth, that's one of their great cultural treasures. And the government took the school where these dancers are trained and sold it to a developer. And the school was rebuilt by the developer. That was part of the deal. Right. But it's so far out of town, the dancers can't get there. When they do, they're robbed. Most of them can't afford transportation there. Once you get there, the plumbing doesn't work. There are no trees. There's no place to eat. It's just really sad and terrible. And it's just total neglect. So that's the absolutely worst side of the equation. Of course, there's even worse poverty than that. There are certain countries that don't have any arts. But
so is that a circumstance of a government that doesn't concern itself with it?
It's a corrupt government.
Corrupt government.
All they care about is I guess it's not very diplomatic of me to say so, but it's a very sad situation there right now. And there are, fortunately, a number of organizations there that are, that are privately funded, that are with a lot of help from Americans, but also Australians, Koreans, Japanese. There's a very international group of supporters in places like Cambodia people who realize how important it is for a country like that.
What got you to Cambodia in the first place?
I just was really interested in seeing Angkor Wat. It's just something that had been on my travel list. So.
And then you just fell in love with the people in the country, or him?
Yes, but interestingly enough, when I was on that first trip and where I saw sea, I thought that was going to be my one and only trip to Cambodia. I thought, well, that's one thing I can check off my list. I've done that. It was great. I really enjoyed it. At the time, I don't know. There were other things I wanted to see. But then once Sea came to the United States and I got to know about the country through the eyes of someone who lived there, and I understood the deprivation these people were suffering, I don't know, somehow I just became more involved. And at the same time that I had been there, the World Monuments Fund had started something called the Center for Khmer Studies, which was created because in their work in Preah Khan with the archaeologists, they were doing labor, but they weren't really in any positions of managing. You'd have the Japanese temple, the American temple, the Dutch temple, the British temple, whatever, but there was no Cambodian effort. And it was their country, it was their heritage. And we just felt that it was important to bring some bright young Cambodians along so that they could be responsible with their own culture. So the original idea was to have a library and to train students to go abroad to graduate school. And very soon we found that that was not going to be sufficient, that you couldn't send enough abroad fast enough, and some of them, once they went, didn't want to come back too. So we started a lot of other programs, and now we have the largest library outside of the National Library in Cambodia, and we have fellowships for Cambodians and training programs and junior faculty training programs. I mean, really building capacity in higher education, and it's really made a huge